Okay, so thank you very much for the introduction. I'll do my best to link with the very first pre-presentation. I mean, maybe I should be talking about many-body quantum physics and things like that, because that's what I'm used to talk about. Tonight I'm talking about something which, as compared to the first talk, is shamelessly useless. In its kind of purity, though, it might have a certain form of aesthetics that you might come to appreciate. So let's just see how it goes. I'll try to tell you a little bit about this thing. So this is a very complicated game played in the early 20th century, for which I'll tell you a few more things later on. But first of all, you might be kind of offended by the title because it sounds very pretentious and things. But actually, let me just explain why this is kind of chosen as a title. Go is possibly one of the oldest games that we know of that is still played, and that has been played for the longest period of time in the same form. And actually, there's documentary evidence that the origin of Go goes back to the very beginnings of time. Essentially, the reason why God created Adam is that he needed somebody to play Go with, and therefore, that justifies the title that I gave to the talk. Now, a little bit more seriously, if you look at the documentary evidence for the origins of Go, you really go back quite long in time. There are legends that say that it was invented about 4,500 years ago by an emperor who wanted to sort out his unruly son. So, you know, father-son relationships were the same 4,500 years ago as today. Very good. More concretely, the first written evidence that we have dates from about 2,500 years ago. So then it's really described as the game that we know today. The modern form of Go really appeared around these years, so around the year 700, and even the modern size, 19 by 19, that I'll show you later, was standard by that time. Go then rapidly spread, so it makes its appearance in Korea on 5th, 7th century. It's known as Baduk in Korea. In China, it's known as Waichi, so it's all the same game. It appeared in Japan in the 7th century, and I think the kind of modern thrust for Go originated from Japan, where a school of professional Go players was founded in 1612, the Honinbo School. It was accompanied then by other schools, and in those days, of course, European kings were just, you know, having sex, getting drunk, and doing things like that. But the Japanese emperor, he liked having Go tournaments. So the West is very, very far behind, and I think it's one thing that you should take over. So let me try to illustrate a few facets of Go. The first thing about Go is that it is, in a sense, extremely simple. The reason why it's simple is because the rules are so easy to explain. So first of all, it's played on a board. It's a board game, after all. Here, you just have an example of a 9 by 9 size here. For beginners, that's a good way to start. 13 by 13 and 19 by 19 are standards. Everybody plays on 19 by 19 who, really likes to delve deeply into Go. So what are the basics? You've got two players, black and white. The stones are played on the intersections of the lines, not in the middles of the squares. Once you place a stone also, it doesn't move. So black begins and players alternate, and the stones don't move. It's not like chess. Okay? The rule one is essentially that liberty gives life. Stones that do not have liberty die. And how do you lose your liberties? Well, you can think of it as breathing space. A stone has a number of breathing spaces that are represented by the lines that you see coming out of it. So if black is busy chatting up somebody during the Nerd Nite, speed dating or something, and white keeps playing around, at some point, black will lose all his or her liberties and be devoured. Okay? So that's how you kill stones. If you have stones that are adjacent to each other on the board, that is connected by one of the lines, okay, then they form a group, and essentially groups live or die together. In this case, white can just capture these three stones in one shot, okay, because the whole group was connected. Okay, so the consequences of this, if you want single basic rule, are quite varied. So one of the nice illustrations of this is the concept of a ladder, which is used very, very often in matches. Be it a threat of a ladder, or maybe an actual ladder if your opponent doesn't know the trick of ladders. But here's what you have to be aware of. If you start playing Go, you can be caught in a ladder. So white can try to escape, but black can simply keep on surrounding white, always reducing the liberties from 2 to 1, until at some point the boundary conditions start being important, and then all white stones are captured. Okay? Of course, if your stones are alive, they might emit some sounds of suffering and things like that, so this is not going well for white in this particular game. Okay, so essentially the idea is that since you play in alternance, you can form live groups. In order to guarantee that your group is sure of not dying, you need to give it eyes. Okay? And the concept of an eye is essentially just a kind of opening inside that you enclose. However, if you have a single eye, it is not sufficient, because of course then black can come here, fine, it can be eaten, but afterwards it can just simply kill all the remaining white stones. If you want to have a live group, you have to give it 2 eyes. Okay? So essentially there's another rule of Go, which is that suicide is illegal. You see life is very idyllic on the Go board. Suicide is illegal, therefore white could not say that I will first play here, and then while my opponent is not watching, I will play here again. Okay? That is not allowed. So a group that has 2 real eyes is necessarily unkillable on the board. For example, these shapes here are live groups that cannot be killed. This one also in the bottom left is alive because it has true eyes, because white cannot come and rupture the connection between the black stones. Okay? So black can live in this way. Examples of dead shapes are here. So all surrounded groups in this very simple illustration are dead because they don't have 2 eyes. This one here, these 2 white stones are about to be captured, therefore the rest will have just 1 eye. This one here, it might have 2 breathing spaces, but white later can just come and fill this here, and capture this. And here it's a false eye, okay? Because you see this stone was not connected to the other. But that's okay, that brings me very quickly to possibly the most interesting aspect of Go, maybe the source of all its richness or its unfathomable complexity. It's that there's a rule which is the Caux rule, okay? Which I find great because I'm called Caux, but it's just not written like that. But anyway, so the Caux rule, actually there are many technically different versions of Caux rule, but in its simplest form, it's that a position cannot be repeated. Therefore, if for example it's white's turn to play, white captures, black cannot recapture immediately. Because then of course you just, quickly lose your evening doing the same thing. So you don't want to do that. So black now has to play somewhere else. Okay, so in this case, for example, black might decide to connect, and white settles the Caux in this way. And the reason why Caux is so interesting is illustrated very simply here. It's that you get Caux fights on the board. And the idea of a Caux fight is as follows. So let's just look at this situation. We've got a black group here, which, if it could connect, would live, because it would have 2 true eyes. Okay? However, it happens to be white's turn to play. Okay? So of course white will want to kill everything, so it will take the Caux. And now black cannot retake the Caux immediately. Therefore, black has to play somewhere else and force an answer of white in order to change the position on the board, so that then black can return to the Caux thereafter. So for example, black must find a Caux threat. A nice Caux threat is here, for example, to try to kill this remaining white group. If black was able to play another shot here, then the white group would be dead. Therefore, white needs an answer. Okay? But now, fine, the position has changed. Therefore, black can retake the Caux. So you have a number of possible Caux threats on both sides, and depending on the equilibrium of these 2, you will find different winners for these Caux. So in this case, for example, if white has no more Caux threats, it will connect, black will connect, and then the black group will be alive. Okay? So that's just essentially a very simple rule that shows you. So what's the object of the game? Very simply, it's to capture territory. And so Weiqi, the Chinese name, means the surrounding game, essentially. So in this case, you can just count the amount of territory that you have for white, and count the amount of territory that you have for black. You are nerds, therefore you can do this, okay? And convince yourselves that, you'll see, we have a winner by 3 points in this case. And if you were capturing stones, each stone you capture counts for 1 point as well. Okay, so that's the idea. Now, one of the aspects of Go, which is really, really nice, is that essentially you can compensate in various ways. So first of all, black initiates the game, therefore has a certain advantage. So then there's the notion of komi. Komi is like a bonus for white to compensate for the fact that white plays second. So usually on a 19 by 19 board, you would give something like 6.5 of komi. And you see it's great because there's a fraction here, and that means that tied games in Go are almost impossible. You always have a winner, okay? So it's not boring like chess where you watch the match, you watch the latest championship and it's just fantastic, you know, so he tied again and they tied 4 times in a row and it's just tied again, and that doesn't happen in Go. There's very often, there's always a winner, almost. I'll show you a counterexample in a few seconds. If you're a player and you want to play against somebody who's stronger than you, then Go offers you the possibility of having still an even game, because you can very easily give a handicap. And how do you do that? Well, very simply by putting some black stones on the board before white plays. So the stronger player takes white, and then depending on the strength difference between the two players, you would give more or less of these stones. Traditionally, you go up to 9 handicap. Of course, if you're playing in informal circumstances, you can give a 27-stone handicap. Maybe some people in the audience can even give you a 30-stone handicap and still thrash you. But yeah, you'll see, okay? So there are rankings, of course, like in everything. The amateurs are ranked from 30 up to 1 Kyu. So 1 Kyu is, if you want the strongest Kyu that you have, then amateurs up to 7 Dan, pros 1 to 9 Dan. And essentially, the rank difference that you have determines the handicap that you should give to your opponent. Okay? So that gives you an idea. So that's the simple part. So now let's just illustrate Go, the complex game. Okay? So interesting facts. It's almost impossible, actually nobody knows how to count the number of possible Go games. So Go introduces a lot of complexity in there that is just insurmountable. It's much easier to give estimates, for example, for the number of different end positions that you can have. 19 by 19 board, 361 intersections, 3 possibilities at each intersection. So it's something like 10 to the 172 possibilities. Much, much more than chess. Of these positions, research shows that about 1% are legal positions. I still have to understand why this is the case. This seems to be like a complete overestimate in my mind, but I have to maybe calculate it at some point. The best computer programs that you have are essentially at the level of the best amateurs that are around. So unlike in chess, a professional Go player can really thrash even the best computers to this day. How long it'll take for computers to overtake the very best Go players, I think is an open issue. We'll see. Okay, so a famous game. Let me just show you a bit the richness of Go from this classic example of a huge clash between Honinbo Shusai, the leader essentially of the Kansai Kiin at the time, against Karigane, a rival, leader of a rival organization. Okay, so in Go, typically you want to surround territory, so you're going to start playing in the corners because that's the most economical way of surrounding territory. Okay, so alternates, then you can form maybe so-called shimaris, formations around the corner that secure the corner, and then, yeah, so your opponent does that. So this just shows you a little bit how it happens. Then there are standard patterns that occur in the corners that are called joseki, that, you have to learn many of these things to understand why essentially every single move here is almost inevitable. Okay, and then as you carry on, you see things become more and more complicated. Okay, so you have some attacks, some defenses, okay, and then some aggressive moves. And at some point, you find such moves as move 22 in this game, which is really a good illustration of a catch-22. I'm sure that Joseph Heller was a Go fan and kind of thought, why do I call it catch-22? Well, it's because of this move in 1926. Because this move here, essentially, is such a good move in this area that there is no proper response. Therefore, the best response for black is not to respond. Okay? And you'll see what happens. As the game develops, indeed, things start happening in other parts of the board. Okay? And in fact, this black group at the bottom is threatened out of its existence. Its life will depend on the death of the surrounding stones. And in fact, this stone here is all determinantal in this clash here, because there are loads of ladders involved here that are either set or broken by this single stone here. So the game goes on and on and on and on like this. Okay, it's extremely complicated, but then in the end you see there's this repulsion effect from the original stone that you can see. So even a move at number 22 will influence, essentially, the fight in the coming 200 moves. Okay? So if you want to beat these guys, you have to see like 200 moves ahead. So, you know, then you're a real nerd. You're not real nerds. Yeah. Okay? So anyway, so in the end, yeah, so the game carries on like this. And then our good friend Karigane at some point admits defeat and move 254 because he has no more time and he knows that he's losing by a handful of points. Okay, so that's how complicated it can be. Go, the heroic game. Huh? So let me share some nice stories. So in history, there was this extremely famous player, Shusaku, and that's my cat, Shusaku. Okay. So this is actually a good drawing of Mr. Shusaku. So Shusaku was really a Go prodigy. As you can see, he lived very, very shortly, but nonetheless had possibly the greatest impact in the 19th century on the Go board. So there's this famous story of the young 17-year-old Shusaku playing against Genan Inseki. And essentially, so in their first match, Inseki gave 2 stones handicap to Shusaku, but then he stopped the game after a few moves because he understood that he was about to be thrashed. So they played an even game. Okay? But at some point, so there were loads of observers looking at this game, and people were commenting, saying, it's not going well for Shusaku. And then at some point, some doctor said, no, I think you're all wrong. You're the Go specialist. I don't know anything about Go, but I'll tell you, Shusaku will win this match. And then they asked him, why? Why do you think that? And he said, well, actually, when Shusaku played this move here, the ears of his opponent, they became all red. Okay? And that means that he just panicked. And you can see the brilliance of this move a little bit. So appreciate the aesthetics. Here you've got some threatened black stones. You've got white here that can build influence and things. Here, there are good places to invade. So this stone here, in a single move, achieves these 4 different purposes. Okay, so it's an extremely beautiful move, possibly the most famous move in the history of Go. Okay? So it's great. You can be a Go move and be more famous than all of you put together. It's great. Okay, so that's the end of the match, just to see how it develops. There was a co-fight at some point that lasts for a little bit. But anyway, that gives you a bit of an idea. I'll just get to the end of this. Okay, so another of my heroes actually is this man here. I was going to say this young man, but he wasn't young. He died at the age of 100 just last November. And the great thing about this guy is that his name was Go. Okay? So this is like a chess player being called, you know, hi, my name is Mate, checkmate. Yeah, so this is like, yeah. So Go Saigen was also a young Go prodigy. He came from China. He was identified by the Japanese and trained very early on. And essentially, he thrashed all of them. So they didn't like him too much at a certain point. But nonetheless, yeah, so he had a very happy life. I absolutely love this picture here of himself, I think at the tender age of 95, with his gloriously happily looking wife, probably of 78 years or something. Okay, but anyway, so this shows you the kind of life force that you can get out of Go. So there's a very famous match where the young Go Saigen essentially took on the whole Japanese establishment, in fact, because he was playing Honinbo Shusai, and Honinbo Shusai could stop the match when he wanted. He could consult all his students when he wanted. Okay. And in fact, at some point, at move 160, there's a brilliant move that occurs. Let me try to get to it. And legend has it that it's actually one of the students of Shusai who found this move. It's coming somewhere. Yeah, so it's coming. Yeah. This one here, this white move here, changes the game around. Okay? So if you are great Go amateurs, like the person sitting right here, ex-champion of the Netherlands, will appreciate the beauty of this move 160 here, and see why actually this ends up winning the game for Honinbo Shusai, despite all the cheating and all the maneuvering and the politicizing and things. Modern heroes, so one who has announced his retirement at the tender age of 30, but actually is kind of, he's winning so much that he's still playing, is the Korean Lee Sedol. So as you can see here, essentially, when he looks at his opponents, he wonders how he will cook them on his barbecue. It's the kind of fighting spirit that he has. So Lee Sedol is a completely spectacular player because he does always unconventional things. Even if he's winning a match, he will take crazy chances and try to even, ravage more territory. So in this game, he plays a ladder that does not work, which is the kind of thing that you shouldn't do as neither an amateur or a professional. But you will see what happens. So this is the ladder that starts. Essentially, Lee Sedol plays black, and he plays this ladder, which doesn't work because the white stones here will save them. But at some point, you realize what he's doing. At this point, his opponent has no understanding what is happening. He does this, but now he does this. And you see, by this move, it means that all the white stones on this side have now died. Okay? So he sacrificed all of this thing in order to kill everything on the right of the board. And if you carry on, you see that he desperately tries to live on the left, doesn't manage, but it doesn't matter because he manages to kill absolutely everything on the upper part of the board here. Okay, so that's the kind of genius that Lee Sedol can have. Go the quotable game, maybe things that allow me to link to the very first part of the presentation. So chess lovers will know Emanuel Lasker, chess grandmaster. He said something nice, which you've read already because it's in the summary of my talk. It is something unearthly, Go that is. If there are sentient beings on other planets, then they play Go. Now my children found that really amusing and they provided the following drawing for the presentation. Another thing is a book that was written by an American author who tries to invent various names for himself, but it doesn't matter, it's still a good novel. Go is to Western chess what philosophy is to double entry accounting. And then my favorite quote is actually from Yamaoka Genrin, Edo period essayist. He says, "Monks who have a talent for it play Go with women and become their lovers." Okay? So this is motivation enough for at least half of the audience. We can see. Go the manga game. So in many countries, people are completely crazy about this game. There's a very, very nice set of stories, set of drawings, mangas about Hikaru. Hikaru is the young little player here who is visited by the spirit of an old Go player from 800 years ago, who happens to be able to possess people. So this spirit actually possessed Shusaku when Shusaku was living, and that's why he was so strong. And when Shusaku died, the spirit wandered again until it landed inside this guy's head. So if you're into manga, you can really look at that. If you're more lazy and don't read Japanese, because again, you're not true nerds, you can just watch the anime series. So the anime series is just the anime version of this thing. So it's a very, very beautiful story. It's extended up to about 75 different episodes, but then you can see. So the young children of Japan essentially grew up in the late 1990s with this series. Okay? Go the Eternal Life game. We have Godly, and that's another thing. So that's a game that was played relatively recently in 2013, and is one of the exceptions to what I said before, that the Go match always has a single winner. If you examine the situation very, very carefully, essentially the life of these black stones depends on the death of these ones, and the life of these ones is guaranteed, that's okay. These ones doesn't look good. But anyway, so these black, you can wonder how to play any further. And then you can see what happens. It's white's turn to play. And now black is in Atari, we call. That means that there's only one liberty left. So black can retake. Okay? And now if black is allowed to play here, black will have an eye with which he'll be able to at least live. So white plays here. But now black wants to make sure that white is not able to form one of the killing shapes here. So we'll play here. Okay? So we're back at the situation at the beginning. So then the match was essentially called quits. So these guys achieved this eternal life. These young people here have already done much more than you because they've achieved eternal life. Granted on the Go board, but nonetheless. On the other hand, Go is also the sudden death game. So the sudden death, you'll witness it here. This is a very famous player, Yoshio Ishida, winner of many, many titles in the 1970s. He's playing against an upcoming player. And if you look at the board situation carefully, there's a bit of a critical point for black here, because black needs two eyes. If white was able to connect all of these here, then this would be a false eye and black would die. Therefore, black would like to cut white here. But of course, if black cuts white here, it's like committing suicide, because then black will have only one space to live and white will be able to capture. completely elementary. Even you can know this by the end of the evening. But let's look at the play of the 9p professional, and then let's look at his reaction. And the commenters in Japan are saying, what the? So trying to retain his composure, Yoshio Ishida kind of politely takes the stones away. And then, so this is really a bad day at the office. And as you'll see, things are, Japanese are not very expressive, but sometimes you can still see it. Okay? Go the divine game. Okay? Actually, in Asia, I tell you, people are completely crazy about the game. They even have action movies about Go. This is an example. So this is like the jazzy, James Bond thing. That's a proper, Amsterdam Go Club. You can do that as well, no? So it's really James Bond style, the foxy babes, the money and everything. It's a great lifestyle. Okay, so this is a movie that I'm sure will have great success in the West. So somebody has to do the equivalent with chess. Okay, so Go, the violent game. You've seen some violence associated to all of this. Actually, there's a very, very nice legend or story which is based in reality, which is that during the Heian period, around 1200, there was actually a very famous general called Yoshitsune, and one of his samurai was Tadanobu. And Tadanobu, at some point, had a brilliant idea, because Yoshitsune was being attacked by various armies, and he was surrounded, and he was about to be captured. So Tadanobu said to Yoshitsune, "Give me your armor, and I will impersonate you and fight off your opponents while you escape." And this happened, and essentially Tadanobu managed to kill off most of the attackers, but at some point all his buddies were dead, and he had to take refuge in Kyoto, in the house of a woman who presumably was his mistress. But unfortunately, she betrayed him to the enemy soldiers. And actually, Tadanobu was in the house in Kyoto, trying to play his Go match, in a tranquil fashion, when they came to arrest him. Tadanobu! But the problem was that Tadanobu had no weapons. He had nothing to defend himself, except the Go board. So Tadanobu vanquished his enemies with the use of a Go board. And this is something that you can see very, very well in many Japanese drawings about this, where you see the scene, essentially, Tadanobu being attacked by a whole army, a whole horde of things. It's coming, it's taking a little while. A whole horde of other samurai. And so in the picture, it's a bit more, violent, because he's actually pulling the hair of his mistress, but we don't want to do that. So anyway, you'll see there are many, many Japanese prints that show you Tadanobu just vanquishing his enemies by, somehow managing to hold these big Go boards and things. Okay? So essentially, that's it. Maybe at the end, I just want to give you suggestions of how you can go further. There are many, many reasons why Amsterdam is such a great city, and one of the reasons is that the best Go shop in the Western universe is actually on the Haarlemmerdijk here. Okay? So this is Schaak and Go Winkel at Paard. If you're even too lazy to go there, they will ship you the books by mail if you so wish. Okay? There are also many members of the Amsterdam Go Club here who are more than willing to show you how to play the game on some demonstration boards. I will let them manifest themselves to you. If you're interested, there are some speelavond on Wednesday and also on Fridays. Okay? Other things, of course, there are many Go-related websites that you can find. So, for example, Sensei's Library, Go Game Guru is very, very nice. GoBase, Aido Go, where you can find many resources. You can play Go online. So if, like me, you like just sitting in your armchair and doing stuff, either working or sometimes passing your frustration on a Go match, then there are many online Go servers that you can become members of, where you can easily get games where you will get immediately thrashed by any Japanese 6-year-old, but it doesn't matter because it's a really important learning experience. You can also find loads of actually extremely high caliber people, professional level people, who will give you lessons where they will explain to you exactly why you are so crap at it and why you should try to study a little bit harder. Okay? But with that said, I wish to thank you. I'll leave you with a few matches, and the kind of beginning of Hikaru. So thank you for your attention.